When my parents passed away, my brothers inherited their house and 58 nuns. Then they kicked me out saying, "Girl, find somewhere else to die. You're useless now. We don't need a maid." Days later, the lawyer laughed. "Did you even read the will?" My brothers went pale because the will said, "The morning my father died, I was elbow deep in dishwater." That's the detail I keep coming back to. Not the phone call from the hospital, not the drive-through, rain so thick I could barely see the road, not even the moment they pulled the sheet back and I saw his face, slack and unfamiliar without the tension that had always lived in his jaw. No. What I remember most clearly is the temperature of that water, how it had gone from scalding to lukewarm to something approaching cold while I scrubbed the same pot over and over, waiting for something I couldn't name. My mother had passed 3 weeks earlier, a stroke in her sleep, the kind they call merciful. I didn't find it merciful. I found it sudden and wrong and incomprehensible, like waking up to discover gravity had reversed while you slept. Dad lasted 23 days after her. The doctors said it was his heart. But I knew better. His heart had stopped working the moment hers did. The rest was just his body catching up to the news. I should tell you who I am, I suppose. Though I've spent so much of my life being defined by other people, sister, daughter, caretaker, burden, that I sometimes forget I have my own version of the story. My name is Eleanor Chen. I'm 47 years old. I have a degree in library science that I never used, and a chronic illness that defined the last 2 decades of my life in ways I'm still untangling. Multiple sclerosis, diagnosed at 26. The relapsing remitting kind, which sounds hopeful until you realize that remitting doesn't mean gone. It means waiting. I have 2 older brothers. Have. The grammar of family is complicated when the relationship is unclear. Michael is 52, David is 50. Growing up, they were a unit, 2 years apart, same friends, same sports, same easy confidence that came from being healthy and male and expected to succeed. I came along 5 years after David, a surprise in every sense of the word. A girl after 2 boys, a quiet child after 2 loud ones, and then, eventually, a sick woman in a family that didn't know what to do with illness except look away from it. For the last 8 years, I lived with my parents, not because I wanted to, though I did love them in the complicated way you love people who both saved you and diminished you, but because my body had made independence increasingly theoretical. The MS had progressed, not dramatically, not the way it does for some people, but enough. Enough that working full-time became impossible. Enough that my savings dwindled and then disappeared. Enough that when my father called and said, "Come home, Eleanor, let us help," I didn't have the luxury of pride. So I came home and I became, in ways none of us ever named directly, the person who kept that household running. My mother had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's 2 years before her stroke. My father refused outside help, partly pride, partly cost, partly a genuine belief that family should care for family. What this meant in practice was that I cooked, cleaned, managed medications, scheduled appointments, sat with my mother during her confused nights, and handled the 1,000 small tasks that make up a life when that life is slowly becoming unfamiliar to the person living it. My brothers visited occasionally, holidays mostly. They'd stay for an afternoon, comment on how good mom looked, considering, slip dad some cash he didn't need, and leave before dinner. They had busy lives, important careers. Michael ran a commercial real estate firm in Seattle. David was a portfolio manager in San Francisco. They had wives and children and obligations that existed in the category of real life, while my existence occupied some other, lesser space. I'm not saying this to elicit sympathy. I'm saying it because it matters for what comes next. I'm saying it because when my brothers showed up for our father's funeral, they looked at me like I was a piece of furniture that had come with the house. The funeral was tasteful and well attended. My parents had been wealthy in the quiet, accumulated way of people who worked hard, saved diligently, and benefited from 40 years of Bay Area real estate appreciation. My father had been an engineer. My mother had been a pediatric nurse before she retired. They weren't flashy people. They drove Hondas and clipped coupons and owned a house in Palo Alto that they'd bought in 1978 for $89,000, and that was now worth somewhere north of $4 million. They also had investments. savings. A stock portfolio my father had managed himself with the same meticulous attention he brought to everything. I knew the rough outline of their finances because I'd helped my father organize his paperwork after my mother's diagnosis. He wanted everything in order, he said, just in case. We spent a weekend going through files, labeling folders, making sure everything was where it should be. "Your mother and I have taken care of you kids," he said at one point, not looking at me. "In the will, it's all worked out." I didn't ask for details. It felt unseemly, like measuring a grave before the person had died. After the funeral, Michael suggested we all go back to the house to discuss next steps. The house, my parents' house, the house where I'd been living for 8 years, where my bedroom was still full of my things, where the pantry was stocked with food I'd bought, with the allowance my father gave me because I had no income of my own. I should have known then, something about the way Michael said the house instead of home. Something about the way David's wife Lauren kept glancing around the living room like she was appraising it. But grief makes you stupid. It wraps your brain in cotton wool and convinces you that surely, the people you've known your whole life won't use the occasion of your parents' death to reveal exactly who they've always been. We sat in the living room. Michael took my father's chair without asking. David and Lauren took the couch. Their kids, 2 teenagers who'd spent the funeral on their phones, had been sent to a hotel. Michael's wife, Stephanie, was resting back at their rental. I sat in the chair by the window, the one I always sat in, the one where I'd read to my mother during her last lucid months. "So," Michael said, "we should talk about the estate." "Isn't there a lawyer for that?" I asked. "A reading of the will or something?" "That's TV stuff." David waved his hand. "The lawyer will send us copies. We already know the basics. Mom and Dad talked to us about it years ago." "They did?" David and Michael exchanged a look, the kind of look that communicated something I wasn't part of. "Dad wanted to make sure the major assets stayed in the family," Michael said carefully. "The house, the investments. He knew you'd need ongoing support. So he set up a trust that will provide you with a monthly stipend. Enough to live on. Find an apartment, maybe somewhere with services you might need." He said the last part with a vague gesture toward my cane, which was leaning against the wall. I felt something cold move through my chest. "A stipend," I repeated. "It's generous," David said quickly. "More than generous, actually. $3,000 a month. That's $36,000 a year, Eleanor. Tax-free. You'll be fine." "And the house?" Another look between them. "The house goes to us," Michael said. 50-50. Which, look, we know this is a lot to process, but we're thinking it makes sense to sell. The market's insane right now. We could get 5, maybe 6 million. "We're also thinking it would be best if you found somewhere else to stay," David added. "Sooner rather than later. Michael wants to bring in a stager this week, and we'll need to clear out personal items, repaint, you know." I stared at him. "Sooner rather than later," I repeated. "I know it's fast. Dad died 4 days ago." Lauren made a noise that might have been sympathetic. "It's just that the market moves so quickly, Eleanor. If we wait—" "I'm not talking to you," I said, and my own voice sounded strange to me. Too calm, like it was coming from somewhere outside my body. "David, are you asking me to leave?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "We're not asking. We're just explaining the situation. The house isn't yours, Elle. It's ours now. We need to sell it, and we can't sell it with you living in it. Where am I supposed to go?" "You'll figure something out." Michael pulled out his phone, checked it. "Put it away. You're not helpless. You managed fine before you moved back here." "I moved back here because I was sick and broke and had nowhere else to go." "And now you'll have a stipend. 3,000 a month. That's more than a lot of people at Ottawa." I looked around the room, at the walls I'd repainted last spring because my mother liked the color yellow, at the garden visible through the window that I'd maintained for years because my father's back couldn't handle the bending anymore, at the kitchen where I'd made 10,000 meals and would apparently never make another. "What about the other assets, I asked. "You said the major assets stay in the family. The investments, how much is that?" The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. "That's not really your concern," Michael said finally. It's my parents' estate. How is it not my concern? Because it's being distributed according to their wishes. His voice had hardened. Dad set this up, Eleanor. He made these decisions. If you have a problem with it, take it up with him. Oh, wait, you can't. I should have cried then. I should have screamed or argued or demanded to see the will with my own eyes. But something had shut down inside me, some circuit breaker, tripping to protect the rest of the system. How long do I have? I heard myself ask. A week? David said. Maybe 2. We're not monsters, Elle. We're not going to throw you out on the street. The next 6 days were a blur. I packed my things, 8 years of life compressed into boxes and suitcases. I made phone calls to friends from college I hadn't talked to in years, to distant cousins, to the social worker assigned to me through my insurance. I looked at apartment listings and felt despair creep through me like cold water because even with $3,000 a month, even in less expensive cities, even with Section 8 vouchers I didn't qualify for, the math didn't work. Not for someone with my medical needs, not in America in 2024. On the 7th day, Michael showed up with movers and a real estate agent named Tanya, who kept calling the house adorable and full of potential. We need to get this stuff out, Michael said, gesturing at my parents' furniture, their books, their photographs. The stager's coming tomorrow. Where is it going? Storage. We'll sort through it later, divide up the sentimental stuff. Do I get any of it? He looked at me like I'd asked for a kidney. We'll figure that out later. Tanya was in the kitchen, opening cabinets, making notes on her phone. I watched her lift my mother's favorite teapot, delicate, hand-painted, a gift from her own mother, and set it aside like it was nothing. I want that, I said. Tanya looked up, startled. Michael stepped between us. Eleanor, we're not doing this now. We'll divide things up fairly, I told you. Just let us handle the sale and then we'll figure out who gets what. I want Mom's teapot. Fine, take it. Take whatever you can carry. But I need you out of here by tonight. I stared at him. You said 2 weeks. I said maybe 2 weeks. Plans change. The stager's coming tomorrow, the photographer's coming Wednesday. We've got 3 showings already scheduled for the weekend. This is happening, Eleanor. I need you to accept that and cooperate. He said the last word like it was a threat. I took the teapot. I took my mother's wedding ring, which she'd asked me to keep in her final lucid months. I took a box of photographs and my father's reading glasses and a small jade Buddha that had sat on my father's desk for as long as I could remember. I didn't take much else. There wasn't time, there wasn't space. There wasn't, if I'm being honest, any fight left in me. David arrived as I was loading my car, an old Camry that my father had given me years ago because he worried about me driving anything less reliable. He stood in the driveway and watched me struggle with a box that was too heavy for me, made no move to help, and when I finally got it into the trunk, he said, "This is for the best, you know. You can't keep living in the past. It's time to move on." I turned to look at him. My little big brother, the one who used to let me ride on his shoulders at the county fair. The one who cried at my college graduation and said he was proud of me. Where am I supposed to go, David? He shifted his weight. You'll figure it out. You always do. Do I? When have I ever figured anything out? You're smart, Elle. Smarter than you give yourself credit for. I'm 47 years old. I'm disabled. I have no job, no savings, and no home. What exactly am I supposed to figure out? His face did something complicated, guilt and annoyance and something that might have been pity, though I think it was actually closer to revulsion. The way you look at a problem you can't solve and don't want to keep looking at. Maybe this is actually a good thing, he said finally. A fresh start. You've been hiding in this house for years, letting Mom and Dad take care of you. Maybe it's time to take care of yourself. I was taking care of them. You were living here for free, Eleanor. Let's not pretend it was some great sacrifice. I opened my car door. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady when I said, I hope you never need anyone the way I needed them. I hope you never have to find out what your family is really made of. He called after me as I drove away, something I couldn't hear through the closed windows. I didn't look back. I drove to a motel in Sunnyvale. Not a nice one, $49 a night, which was still more than I could afford, but I needed to be somewhere with walls and a door that locked. I sat on the bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling and tried to figure out what came next. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Lawyer will be in touch. REITs stipend. Trust takes 2 to 3 weeks to activate. In meantime, let us know if you need anything. I had $1,700 in my checking account. My prescriptions cost $400 a month, even with insurance. My car needed an oil change and probably new brakes. My credit cards were maxed from the months I'd spent supplementing my parents' grocery budget when their accounts were frozen during the transition of my mother's death. I needed everything. I didn't text back. 3 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Chen, this is Robert Huang from Huang & Associates. I was your parents' estate attorney. I sat up straighter, which sent a spike of pain through my lower back. Yes, hello. I'm calling to schedule a meeting regarding the estate. There are some matters we need to discuss in person. My brothers said the will was straightforward, that everything was already decided. A pause. Then, did they say what was in the will? The house and investments go to them. I get a monthly stipend. Another pause, longer this time. When Robert Huang spoke again, his voice was careful in a way that made something in my chest tighten. Ms. Chen, I think it would be very beneficial for you to come into my office. Are you available tomorrow? I almost didn't go. I lay in that motel bed, my body aching from the cheap mattress, my mind racing through all the ways this could be a mistake. Maybe the lawyer just wanted me to sign something. Maybe my brothers had changed their minds and decided to cut my stipend. Maybe there was some complication with the trust that would delay my money even further. But something kept nagging at me. The pause in Robert Huang's voice. The careful way he'd said beneficial. I drove to his office the next morning. It was in a small professional building in Mountain View. Nothing flashy, just a suite with a waiting room and a receptionist who offered me water and told me Mr. Huang would be right with me. I sat in a leather chair and tried not to fidget. My left leg was bothering me the way it always did when I was stressed. The MS liked to remind me it was there whenever I most needed to forget. Ms. Chen? Robert Huang emerged from his office. He was younger than I'd expected, mid-40s maybe, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Please, come in. His office was cluttered but organized. Stacks of files on every surface but arranged in some system only he understood. He gestured to a chair across from his desk, then sat and folded his hands. Thank you for coming. I know this must be a difficult time. That's one word for it. He smiled faintly. Your father was a very private man, very particular about how he wanted things handled. He came to me 6 years ago and made several significant changes to his estate plan. He was very clear that these changes were to remain confidential until the appropriate time. What kind of changes? Robert Huang opened a folder on his desk. Ms. Chen, are you aware of the total value of your parents' estate? Not exactly. My brothers mentioned the house was worth 4 or 5 million. They didn't talk about the rest. He nodded slowly. The house, at current market appraisal, is worth approximately 4.3 million. Your parents also had investment accounts, retirement funds, and several other assets. The total estate value is approximately $62 million. I heard the number but couldn't process it. I'm sorry, 62 million, yes. That's not possible. My parents were comfortable, but they weren't. They drove Hondas. They used coupons. Your father was an extremely savvy investor. He started with a modest amount in the early 80s and was remarkably prescient about technology stocks. He also made several real estate investments that performed very well. Robert Huang removed a document from the folder. He was very private about his wealth. I got the impression he was concerned about how it might affect his children. I thought of Michael in his expensive suits, always talking about deals and returns and market positions. I thought of David with his portfolio manager confidence, his assumption that he understood money better than anyone else in the family. They don't know, I said quietly. My brothers. They think the house is most of it. That's correct. Your father was very deliberate about what information he shared with whom. I stared at the document in his hands. My father's careful handwriting was visible at the bottom. I'd recognize it anywhere. What does the will say? Robert Huang put on his reading glasses. The will establishes several trusts and outlines specific distributions. I'll summarize the key points, and then you can read the full document. He cleared his throat. The primary residence in Palo Alto is bequeathed to your brothers, Michael and David Chen, in equal shares. However, he held up a finger, the will stipulates that you, Eleanor Chen, have the right to reside in the property for up to 2 years following your father's death, or until you establish alternative permanent housing, whichever comes first. Your brothers cannot compel you to leave before that period. I felt something shift in my chest. 2 years? That was your father's instruction. He was concerned about you being displaced too quickly. I thought of Michael's movers, David's face in the driveway, the motel room where I'd spent the last 3 nights. They kicked me out, I said, a week after the funeral. They said they needed to stage the house. Robert Huang's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. That was a violation of the will's terms. They had no legal right to remove you. I didn't know. I know. That's part of why I called you directly, rather than going through your brothers. He set the first document aside and picked up another. Now, regarding the financial assets. I braced myself. The stipend, $3,000 a month, $36,000 a year. Generous, Michael had said, more than a lot of people haven't. Your father established 3 separate trusts, Robert Huang continued. The first, the Chen Family Trust, holds the bulk of the investment portfolio, approximately $58 million. This trust is distributed equally among the 3 surviving children. Equal. I must have made a sound because Robert Huang paused. Ms. Chen, are you all right? Equal, I repeated. Among the 3? Yes, Michael, David, and Manu, approximately $19.3 million each. The room tilted. I gripped the arms of my chair. That can't be right. I assure you it is. Your father was very specific. He said, Robert Huang consulted his notes. My daughter, Eleanor, has given years of her life to caring for her mother and me. She has asked for nothing and received little recognition. This is my attempt to correct that imbalance. I couldn't speak. Something was happening behind my eyes. Pressure building, my throat closing around words that wouldn't come. There's more, Robert Huang said gently. The second trust is a healthcare trust, established specifically for you. It holds $2 million and is designated for your medical expenses, to be administered by a trustee of your choosing. Your father wanted to ensure that your illness would never leave you vulnerable again. $2 million for my healthcare, for the medications and the treatments and the eventual care I might need as the MS progressed. For the future, I'd been too afraid to look at directly. And the third trust? I managed to ask. The third trust is smaller, $500,000, and is designated for any charitable causes you wish to support. Your father noted that you'd always been generous with your time and energy, and he wanted you to have the means to be generous in other ways as well. Robert Huang removed his glasses and looked at me directly. Ms. Chen, your father left you approximately $22 million. You are not, as your brothers apparently suggested, receiving a modest monthly stipend. You are one of the primary beneficiaries of a very substantial estate. I don't remember leaving his office. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot, staring at the folder of documents on my passenger seat. I remember the sunshine through the windshield, warm on my hands, incongruous with the cold shock still moving through my system. $22 million. I'd been counting quarters for the vending machine at the motel. I'd been calculating how many more nights I could afford before I'd have to sleep in my car. I'd been mourning not just my parents, but my whole future. The long, slow decline I'd imagined, the dependence, the eventual need for care I couldn't afford. And the whole time my father had been building a fortress around me. Quietly, secretly, with the same meticulous attention he brought to everything. I cried then, ugly crying, the kind that comes from somewhere so deep it feels like internal organs. I cried for my father, who had seen me, really seen me, in ways I hadn't understood. I cried for my mother, who would never know the gift her husband had given their daughter. I cried for myself, for the woman who had accepted her brother's cruelty as a kind of inevitability, who had packed her things and driven away without question, who had been so beaten down by life that she'd forgotten she deserved better. When the tears finally stopped, I picked up my phone. I had 3 missed calls from Michael. The messages started coming that evening. "Elle, we need to talk. Call me." "Eleanor, this is ridiculous. The lawyer won't discuss the estate with us until you sign some forms. What's going on?" "I'm serious. Call me back. Now." I didn't call. Instead, I checked into a nicer hotel, a real one, with clean sheets and a gym and a room service that didn't look like it might give me food poisoning. I took a long bath. I ordered a meal I didn't have to calculate the cost of. I slept for 10 hours straight. The next morning, I called Robert Huang. "I need to understand the timeline, Ted," I said. "My brothers, they're going to contest this, aren't they?" "They can try." His voice was calm, almost amused. "But your father anticipated that. The will is extremely well documented. There are letters explaining his reasoning, witnessed by independent parties. There are records of his decision-making process going back years. He also included a provision that any beneficiary who contests the will and loses forfeits their inheritance entirely." "He did that?" "Your father was a very thorough man." I thought of all those weekends we'd spent together organizing files, the way he'd looked at me sometimes, like he was trying to tell me something without words. "Did he know," I asked, "how they would treat me?" A pause. "I think he hoped he was wrong, but he planned for the possibility that he wasn't." 2 weeks later, I got a call from David. Not a text, an actual phone call at 11 o'clock at night. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. "Eleanor." His voice was strained. "We need to talk." "Do we?" "The lawyer, Huang, he finally released the full terms of the will. There's been some kind of mistake." "No mistake." Silence on the line. "You knew," David said finally. At the house, when we told you about the stipend, you knew." "No, I found out after." "But you didn't say anything. You let us..." "Let you what? Kick me out of my home? Tell me I was useless? Treat me like garbage that needed to be disposed of before you could cash in on our parents' deaths? That's not fair, isn't it?" I could hear him breathing, could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes. David, the portfolio manager, always looking for the angle. "Look," he said, his voice shifting into something more conciliatory. "We were all grieving. Things were said that shouldn't have been said. But we're family, Elle. We can work this out." "Work what out?" "The estate, the distribution, this equal split thing. Dad clearly wasn't thinking straight at the end. Mom's illness must have affected his judgment. We can challenge it, but that would get ugly. Lawyers would take a huge cut, and none of us want that. So let's just talk, the 3 of us. Find a solution that works for everyone." I almost laughed. "A solution that works for everyone, Tannisin," I repeated, meaning a solution that gives you and Michael what you think you deserve. "I'm trying to be reasonable here. You told me I'd been hiding for years, letting Mom and Dad take care of me. You said I was living there for free, like it was some kind of vacation. I was upset. You said maybe it was a good thing I was being thrown out. A fresh start. Time to take care of myself." "Eleanor, do you know what I was doing while you were upset, David? I was making sure Mom took her medications. I was cleaning up after her when her body forgot how to control itself. I was sitting with Dad at 3 a.m. when he couldn't stop crying because the woman he'd loved for 50 years didn't recognize him anymore. I was there for every doctor's appointment, every crisis, every small humiliation of watching 2 proud people lose their independence piece by piece. Where were you?" He was quiet for a long moment. "You're not going to negotiate," he said. "I'm going to honor our father's wishes, the way you should have done from the beginning." Michael called the next morning. He wasn't conciliatory. He was furious. "This is going to court," he said. "I want you to know that. We're contesting the will. Dad was clearly not competent when he made these changes. Mom was sick, he was under stress, and yet you took advantage of that. You manipulated him. Is that what you tell yourself? It's what any judge will see. A disabled daughter, desperate and dependent, whispering in an old man's ear about how unfair life was, convincing him to cut his sons out of their rightful inheritance. I didn't know about the will until after you threw me out." "So you say." "Michael." I kept my voice even, though my hands were shaking. "Dad included a forfeiture clause. If you contest and lose, you lose everything." "Then we won't lose." He documented everything. Years of decisions, witnesses, letters explaining his reasoning. This wasn't dementia or manipulation. This was a man who saw exactly who his children were and acted accordingly. What's that supposed to mean? It means you should ask yourself why Dad felt the need to protect me from you. He hung up. The months that followed were complicated. Michael did contest the will, as promised. David joined the suit, though I got the sense his heart wasn't entirely in it. Their lawyers argued diminished capacity, undue influence, all the things Robert Huang had predicted. The evidence told a different story. My father had first updated his will 6 years before his death, long before my mother's Alzheimer's diagnosis, long before anyone could claim he wasn't thinking clearly. He'd revised it twice since then, each time adding more documentation, more explanation, more witnesses. In one letter, written 2 years before his death, he'd described his reasoning. "I have 3 children and I love them all, but love does not mean blindness. Michael and David have been blessed with health, opportunity, and success. They have never wanted for anything. They have also, I am sorry to say, grown into men who value achievement above compassion and acquisition above family. Eleanor has faced challenges her brothers cannot imagine. She has met those challenges with grace and without complaint. When her mother needed care, Eleanor gave it. When I needed help, Eleanor provided it. She has asked for nothing and received little recognition. I am rectifying that now, while I still can, not because Eleanor asked, she never would, but because it is right, and because I fear what would happen to her if I left her in her brother's hands." The judge read that letter aloud in court. I watched Michael's face as my father's words filled the room. Watched him realize, perhaps for the first time, that Dad had seen through him, had always seen through him. The case was dismissed. Michael and David kept their shares, the house, and about $19 million each, but they didn't get mine. The forfeiture clause wasn't triggered because technically they hadn't lost. The case was dismissed on its merits before reaching a verdict. A technicality that I suspect my father had also planned for. He'd wanted to give his sons every chance, even after everything. I bought a house, not a mansion, a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place my parents would have approved of. It had a garden I could manage and wide doorways that would accommodate a wheelchair if that day ever came. I hired a financial advisor to help me manage the investments. I set up the healthcare trust with a trustee I trusted. I donated a portion of the charitable fund to MS research and another portion to organizations that help family caregivers, the invisible army of people doing what I did, often with far fewer resources. I didn't hear from my brothers. This was, I'll admit, both a relief and a grief. The relief is obvious, the grief is harder to explain. I kept thinking about who we used to be, about Michael teaching me to ride a bike, running alongside me with his hand on the seat, shouting encouragement, about David letting me tag along with his friends to the movies, pretending I was cool enough to belong, about family dinners and holiday mornings and the 1,000 ordinary moments that make up a childhood. Where had those people gone? The brothers who'd loved me before loving me became inconvenient. I didn't have an answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe people don't change so much as reveal who they were all along. A year after the estate was settled, I got an email from David. I'm not sure if you'll read this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. Michael is still angry. I don't think he'll ever not be angry. That's on him. But I've been thinking about what you said on the phone, about where I was while you were taking care of them. And you were right. I wasn't there. I told myself I was too busy, too far away, that there was nothing I could do that you weren't already doing better. But the truth is, I just didn't want to see it. Didn't want to see them getting old, didn't want to see you getting sicker, didn't want to see any of it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't think I've earned that. I just wanted you to know that I heard you and I'm sorry. David, I read the email 3 times. I didn't respond. Another year passed. I got better at living, at managing my health, my money, my solitude. I joined a book club. I started volunteering at a library. I adopted a cat named Chairman Mao, a joke my father would have appreciated. The MS continued its slow progression, as it always would, but I faced it differently now, not with fear, but with something closer to acceptance. I had resources, I had options, I had the security my father had fought to give me. I thought about him every day. I thought about the quiet way he'd loved me, so different from the loud, obvious love he'd shown my brothers. The way he'd watched and waited and planned, building a safety net in the dark, trusting that I wouldn't need it, but ensuring I'd have it anyway. I thought about my mother, too. About the teapot I still used every morning. About her wedding ring, which I wore on a chain around my neck. About her hand on my cheek in those final lucid moments, her voice saying, "Take care of yourself, Eleanor. Promise me." I'd promised, and I was keeping that promise as best I could. On the 2nd anniversary of my father's death, I drove to the cemetery. They were buried side by side, my parents, in a plot they'd chosen together decades ago. The headstones were simple, just names and dates and beloved in elegant script. My father had picked them out himself, had shown me the designs in his office one afternoon when we were organizing files. "Not too fancy," he'd said. "We were never fancy people." I stood there for a long time, not speaking. I didn't believe they could hear me, not really. But I believed in the ritual of it, the act of showing up, of remembering, of honoring the connection even after it had been severed by death. "I'm okay," I said finally. "I wanted you to know, whatever you were worried about, whatever you thought might happen, I'm okay. I have a home. I have a life. I have everything you tried to give me." A breeze moved through the cemetery, rustling the leaves of a nearby oak. "I wish you could have told me. I wish I'd known what you were thinking, what you were planning, but I understand why you didn't. You wanted me to believe it was about me, not about the money, and it was. It always was." I touched my father's headstone, then my mother's. "Thank you," I said, "for seeing me, for believing I was worth protecting." When I got home, there was a car in my driveway, a rental. I could tell by the plates. And sitting on my porch steps, looking smaller than I remembered, was David. He stood when he saw me. He looked older somehow, thinner. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I wasn't sure you'd be here," he said. "I wasn't sure either." We stood there, looking at each other across the garden I'd planted, the house I'd bought, the life I'd built from the ashes of everything he'd tried to take from me. "Can we talk?" he asked. I thought about it. I thought about the email he'd sent, the one I'd never answered. I thought about the brother he used to be, and the stranger he'd become. I thought about my father's letter, his sorrow at watching his sons grow into men who valued acquisition above family. I thought about forgiveness, whether it was earned or given, whether it required an apology or only understanding, whether offering it was weakness or strength. "Come inside," I said. I didn't know what would happen next, whether we'd find our way back to something resembling family or simply confirm that the distance between us was permanent. But my father had given his sons every chance. Even after everything, I could do the same. We sat in my kitchen, the one I designed myself, the one with the wide counters and the accessible appliances and the window that looked out over the garden. I made tea in my mother's teapot. David held his cup like he wasn't sure what to do with it. "Lauren left me," he said. "6 months ago, the kids, they're in college now, they barely call. Michael isn't speaking to me because I told him I was coming here today." I didn't say I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. "I keep thinking about that day in the driveway," David continued, "when you asked where you were supposed to go and I said you'd figure it out." He shook his head. "I think about that all the time, the look on your face, like you'd finally understood something you'd been trying not to see." "What did I understand?" "That we weren't who you thought we were, that we hadn't been for a long time." I took a sip of my tea. It was still too hot, but I didn't mind. Why are you here, David? He was quiet for a moment, looking down at his hands. When Dad died, he said finally, I told myself we were doing the right thing, that he'd lost perspective, that you'd manipulated him, that the money should go to the people who'd actually built something with their lives, and I believed it, I really did. And now? Now I realized that Dad saw exactly what he was looking at. Two sons who'd forgotten where they came from, who'd gotten so caught up in success that they'd stopped being human. He met my eyes. You were the only one of us who stayed human, Elle. You were the only one who remembered what mattered. I set my cup down. I'm not a saint, I said. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. I took care of them because it was that, or watched them struggle alone. I wasn't being noble. I was just there. That's what makes it noble, David said quietly. You could have checked out. You could have found excuses. God knows Michael and I did, but you stayed anyway. We sat in silence for a while. Outside, a bird landed on the garden fence, then flew away. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said. Not completely, not for what you said, what you did, how quickly you were willing to throw me away. I know, but I'm willing to try, not for your sake, for mine, because carrying this around is exhausting, and I have enough to carry already. David nodded slowly. I'll take that, he said. I'll take whatever you're willing to give. He stayed for dinner. We talked about our parents, not the death, not the will, not the ugly aftermath, but the good things. The family trips to Yosemite, the way Mom used to sing in the kitchen, Dad's terrible puns that he'd deploy with such pride. We talked about being kids together before the fractures started forming, before success and failure sorted us into categories, before illness marked me as someone to manage rather than someone to know. We didn't solve anything. We didn't reach some grand reconciliation that tied everything up neatly. But when David left, he hugged me, and I let him. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something smaller and maybe more honest, an acknowledgement that we were both still here, still trying, still carrying the same loss, even if we'd handled it differently. I stood in my doorway and watched his rental car disappear down the street. Then I went back inside, washed the dishes, fed the cat. Life continued. 3 years after my father's death, I received an invitation to Michael's daughter's wedding. I was surprised. Michael and I hadn't spoken since the court case. I assumed it was a peace offering or maybe just propriety, the kind of gesture you make because it would look strange not to. I debated for weeks before deciding to go. The wedding was in Seattle, at a fancy venue overlooking the water. I wore a dress I'd bought for the occasion, something elegant but not showy. I arrived early and sat in the back, prepared to leave if it felt too uncomfortable. Michael found me during the cocktail hour. He looked the same, successful, confident, perfectly dressed. But there was something in his eyes that I didn't remember seeing before. A weariness, maybe? Or just age. You came, Dee, he said. Your daughter invited me. I know. I asked her to. We stood there, surrounded by well-dressed strangers, holding glasses of champagne neither of us was drinking. Dad was right about me, Michael said abruptly. I read that letter, the one he wrote for the lawyers, the one where he talked about achievement above compassion. He was right. I didn't know what to say. I'm not going to apologize for going to court, he continued. I thought I was right at the time, and honestly, part of me still thinks Dad wasn't fair. But that's my problem, not yours. He took a breath. I am going to apologize for how I treated you, before the will, before the lawyers, before any of that. The day we asked you to leave, that was wrong. Yes, I said. It was. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not even sure I want you to, but my daughter is getting married today, and I didn't want to stand here pretending we're strangers. We're not strangers, Elle. We're family, even if we're bad at it. I looked at my brother, this man I'd known my whole life and didn't know at all. Dad gave you every chance, I said. Even after everything, even after he knew exactly who you were. I know. I'm willing to do the same, but I don't know what that means yet. I don't know if we can be anything other than what we are. Michael nodded slowly. Fair enough, he said. His daughter found us then, radiant in her wedding dress, and the moment passed. I congratulated her, complimented the venue, made polite conversation with family members I barely remembered. At the end of the night, I slipped out without saying goodbye. There's no tidy ending to this story. Michael and I still aren't close. We email occasionally, birthdays, holidays, the kind of contact that acknowledges a connection without requiring anything from it. David and I are slightly better. He visits sometimes, and we've found a way to be in the same room without old wounds opening. I still think about my parents every day. I think about my father's quiet planning, his secret preparation for a future he wouldn't live to see. I think about my mother's teapot, her ring, the 1,000 small objects that carry her presence into my daily life. I think about what it means to be seen. For most of my life, I felt invisible. The sick sister, the dependent daughter, the woman who didn't become anything because her body wouldn't let her. But my father saw something else. He saw the years of care I gave without being asked. He saw the strength it took to show up, day after day, when showing up was hard. He saw me. And he tried in his methodical way to ensure that the world would see me too, that I would have the resources not just to survive, but to live. I don't know if I've lived up to that gift. I don't know if it's possible to live up to something that size, but I try. I wake up every morning in my house with my cat, and I make tea in my mother's teapot. I go to my book club and my volunteer shifts and my doctor's appointments. I manage my health, my money, my small and precious life. And sometimes, when the light is right and the world is quiet, I sit in my garden and I feel something that might be peace, not happiness exactly. Not the triumphant joy of someone who won, just peace, the kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I'm 50 years old now. The MS has progressed as expected. I use a walker most days, a wheelchair for longer distances. There's a live-in aide who helps with things I can no longer do alone. My father's healthcare trust covers everything, as he intended. I've been thinking about the future, not with fear the way I used to, but with something more like curiosity. Whatever comes next, I'll face it with resources, with support, with the dignity my father wanted for me. Sometimes I wonder what I would have become if things had been different, if I'd stayed healthy, if I'd had a career, a family, all the conventional markers of a life well lived. But I don't wonder long. This is my life, the only one I get. And it's enough. Last month, I went back to my parents' house. Michael sold it years ago to a young family, the kind of people who would fill it with noise and life and the chaos of children. I didn't tell them I was coming. I just drove past, slowly, looking at the windows, the garden, the driveway where I'd loaded my car that terrible day. It looked different, happy. The family had painted the shutters blue and planted roses by the mailbox. There were bicycles on the lawn and a basketball hoop above the garage. I pulled over and sat there for a while just looking. I thought about all the hours I'd spent in that house, all the meals I'd cooked, the medicines I'd administered, the nights I'd sat up with one parent or the other. I thought about the day I left, how I'd driven away with $1,700 and no idea what came next. I thought about the lawyer's office, the folder of documents, the numbers that had changed everything. And I thought about my father, in his chair, surrounded by files, planning for a future he wouldn't see. A little girl came out of the house, 6 or 7, gap-toothed and grinning. She ran to the roses and picked one, then ran back inside, shouting something I couldn't hear. I started the car and drove away. The house wasn't mine anymore. It never really had been, but the life I'd built from its ruins, that was mine. And it was good. Here's the thing about inheritance. It's not just money, it's not just property, it's everything your parents gave you, the love and the disappointment, the lessons and the wounds, the ways they saw you and the ways they failed to see you. My parents left me money, yes, enough to live on, enough to be safe, but they also left me something harder to name. A belief that I mattered, a conviction that my life, my small, limited, imperfect life was worth protecting. I carry that with me now, everywhere I go. When the MS reminds me that my body is betraying me, I remember that someone thought I was worth fighting for. When the loneliness gets heavy, and it does, it always does, I remember that being alone doesn't mean being worthless. When I doubt myself, doubt my choices, doubt whether any of it matters, I remember my father's letter. His careful words, his quiet love. She has asked for nothing and received little recognition. I am rectifying that now while I still can. He rectified it, and I am trying every day to deserve it. There's one more thing I should tell you. After the estate was settled, after the court case and the silence and the long, slow work of rebuilding, I found something in my father's papers, something Robert Huang had given me along with all the official documents tucked in an envelope labeled, "For Eleanor, when she's ready." It was a letter, handwritten, dated a month before his death. "My dear Eleanor," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you any of this in person. I didn't trust myself to get through it without crying, and I didn't want your last memory of me to be tears. I want you to know that I see you. I've always seen you, even when I couldn't show it the way you deserved. You have been the grace of my old age, the one bright thing in years that were otherwise full of loss. Your brothers will be angry. They may say terrible things. They may try to take what I've given you, but I've prepared for that as best I could. The lawyers know, the courts will know, and now you know too. You deserve this, Eleanor, not because you earned it, though you did, more than you understand, but because you are my daughter, and a parent's job is to protect their children, all their children, equally. I wish I could be there to see you build your new life. I wish I could watch you become whoever you're meant to be without the weight of worry holding you down. But since I can't, I'll leave you with this. Be happy, be selfish sometimes, take up space in the world. You've spent so many years making yourself small. Now it's time to expand. Your mother would tell you the same thing if she could. She loved you so much, Eleanor. On her clearest days, even at the end, she would ask about you. Where's Eleanor? Is she eating enough? Is she resting? You were her last coherent thought. I hope that gives you some comfort. I love you. I'm proud of you, and I will be watching over you in whatever form that takes. Your father. I read that letter every year on the anniversary of his death. It still makes me cry. But now, finally, the tears are mostly grateful ones. What else is there to say? My brothers kicked me out. The lawyer asked me if I'd read the will. My brothers went pale. And the will said that someone, somewhere, had loved me enough to plan for a future I couldn't imagine. That's the inheritance that matters most. Not the money, not the house, not even the recognition, just the knowledge that I was seen. I was loved. And in the end, I was protected. That's more than a lot of people get. It's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything.